In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to build a really simple to-do style application with Ionic 2. It's going to be very simple for now. We're just going to create something that can view some data, add some data, and also save that data so it's available later as well. So we're going to do this completely from scratch. So we're going to start off by creating a new blank Ionic 2 project. If you haven't already got Ionic 2 set up yet, I'll link to a blog post I've already done where I explain how you can get up and running. But it's more or less exactly the same as it was in Ionic 1. You can just run Ionic start and then the name of your application, which we'll call Ionic to do. We want to use the blank template for this one. And you also need to provide a v2 flag to actually build it with Ionic 2. So I'll hit enter and get that to start generating. Okay, that's finished generating now. So if I just change my directory to the project that I just created, now I can run Ionic serve again. It's the same as Ionic 1 to pop up the application in the browser window I've got here. And so this still has all the live reloading, so as soon as you make a change in your file, you'll see it here right away. So there is a little bit of template code here in the blank application, but it's more or less just an empty project. So now I'm going to open up that project and we're going to have a look at the code. Okay, I've got the code open up now in my text editor. You can see all the files and folders over here. If you want more of an explanation on, I guess, the general structure of an Ionic 2 project, the blog post I'll link will give you some more information on that. But we're just going to jump straight into the coding side of things. And the folder we're going to look at here is under the www folder. We have app. And that's where basically all of the code for the application is going to live. And so there's a default home component that's already being created here. And that's what we saw just a second ago. We don't really want to call that home for this application though. So what we're going to do is just rename it to what we want. So I'm going to call that list. And we're going to be creating a few more of these components as well. And I'll rename that to list.html, so that's the template file for the list component, or what will be the list component at least. And this is our JavaScript file, and rename that to list.js. Okay, we'll come back to that in a second. Actually, we might just change this now so we don't forget. So obviously that's importing from different location now, so change that to list. And we'll call it list component instead. Actually, we'll call it list page instead of home component. Okay, save that. And let's jump into the app.js file here. So you can see it's importing the home component from that folder that we just changed. So we'll also change that to list page, and that's importing from the list folder. Okay, and you can see there's a template defined for the app.js file, just like there's a list template here, but it's a pretty simple one. So they've just got it defined in a string here. But if you want to define it in a file, you could separate that out and say template URL and provide that there instead. But we'll just keep it like that for now. We'll leave that as app component, that's fine. But we do want to change the root page here to our list page. Okay, so that should all work now. So if I take a look in the browser again, that should just look exactly the same, and it does. And just to show you that that's live updating, if I just change that to home 1, save it, and in a couple of seconds you'll see this change. No, you won't actually, because I caused an error. So I'll just have to restart that again. If I run Ionic serve again, that should fix that. Okay, I've got the app up again now, and if I change that to home 2 now, it goes, it reloads, and we can see the change right away. Okay, now that that's all working correctly, we're going to actually start building some stuff, and we're going to start by modifying this list template so that it looks more like what we're actually going to need for our to-do list application. So to start off with, we have this Ion nav bar defined here, and it's using this weird star thing which is new to Angular 2. So basically that transforms this into a template component, and the Ion nav bar uses that, the Ion nav rather uses that as its configuration for what should be happening in the navigation bar. So right now we're just supplying a title called home, but we're going to want to have a little button over here on the right hand side so we can add new items to the to-do list. So to do that, we can add a directive here called Ion nav items, and we can either set this to be primary or secondary. So I'm going to set that to secondary. What that means basically is, in the case of iOS, the secondary items will be on the right side of the toolbar, and the primary buttons will be on the left. And that depends on what platform you're running on. So Ionic will automatically decide where it should sit based on what you supply here. But if you want to more explicitly set that and say, well, I want it to always be on the right, then you can do that as well. Okay, now we're just going to add a button here, and we're going to add a listener to it, a click listener. This is kind of like ng click from Ionic 1 or Angular 1. And we're going to call the add item function when that is clicked. Of course, we haven't defined that yet, but we will soon. And we're going to add one of the new Ionicons, or at least the new syntax here. So to add an icon, all you have to do is type icon and say what icon you want. So I want the add icon for that. And let's also say add item to make it really clear. So I've hit save, I should see my button pop up there, and I can, which is good. And now we want to replace this Ion content, or the Ion card section rather, with a list that's going to display all of our to-do items. So we'll use the same Ion list that you would use in Ionic 1 as well. And we will add the Ion item to that. And now we're going to do an ng4, which is similar to ng repeat from Angular 1. And so we want to loop over items. So we're going to say hash item of items. So what this will do is it'll loop through each of the items in our items data, wherever that's defined. And we're also, by setting this hash here, we're keeping a reference to each item, which we can then say pass into a click function, which we are about to do right now. So we'll add a click listener there and set that to equal view item. Again, we haven't defined this yet, but we will soon. And we're going to pass in that reference to the item. So when someone clicks that, we'll be able to pass that into our function and do what we want with it, which will be displaying a page with some new data eventually. And we also just want to render the title of the item here. Again, it's the same as Ionic 1. Let's use the double braces there to display that. Okay, I'll hit save there. Okay, so now the cards are gone. Obviously the list is blank because we don't have any data actually defined yet. So let's jump over into list.js here. And we're going to set up our constructor to actually have some items defined. Okay, I've gone ahead and just added some data into the constructor now, and you can see that that's reflected in our list that's getting pulled in there. So now what we want to do is let's go with the add item. I guess that's a good place to start. So we're going to create our function here. So we're already calling this from our list.html. Where are we? So add item. So when that's clicked, that's calling add item from list.js here. So let's create that, add item. And what we want to do is say this.nav.push add item page. And we're also going to pass in this list page component, so we have a reference to that. So none of these, this isn't going to work now. I suspect if I change that, that's going to break the library loading. No, still works. Okay, well that's good. So we're pushing a new component onto a navigation stack here. So we've got add item page, which doesn't exist yet. That'll be a new component just like this list is. And we're also using the nav controller as well. But to use the nav controller, we need to import that. So I'll just add that to here. That comes from the Ionic library as well. So just write nav controller there. Just going to put a semicolon on the end of that to make me feel better. And then we can pass that through our constructor here. So we can set nav to nav controller. And then we'll just store that as a member variable on our component here. So we'll say this.nav equals nav. And so now that will be available here. And now we just need to add that item page. So let's go over and create that component now. To make things easier, I'll do this off screen. Okay, so I've added a new component now. I've copied the same structure that we're using for the list here. I've got the add item.html and add item.js. And so now I'm going to create the template for that. So I'm just going to copy and paste this one over to save a bit of time. And it's going to be a very similar setup, but let's change the title of this one to add item. And we're also going to change this click handler to call save item. And I'll just get rid of that icon and change that to save. So we'll create this save item a little bit later as well. And we're going to replace our Ion item here with a couple of input fields. So we'll do Ion input, and we'll use the floating label. I think this is new to Ionic 2. I haven't seen it in Ionic 1, but it provides a nice little effect when you click on the input area, which you'll see in a second, obviously. Set the title. So that's the title of the note. And we'll do a text input. And this syntax here sets up that two-way data binding. So that's similar to the ng model from Ionic 1. And I'll just copy over the next one. I'll do that off camera as well to speed things up a bit. Okay, we've got a couple inputs set up now. So we've got the title of the note, the description of the note, and we have this two-way data binding set up. So this will, as we change this, it'll affect our add item.js here. We'll have the title and description set up, kind of like we have the item set up here. And so as soon as we make a change to these fields, it'll automatically get updated there as well. So now we're going to build this add items.js or add item.js page file. So let's just steal the code from our list.js, and again it's going to look pretty similar. Okay, we're going to keep the nav controller for this one as well, but we're also going to import the nav params, which will basically allow us to pass in data from one view to another. So in this case, we're going to want to pass in the list page. And the reason for this is because eventually I'm going to create a data service and we're going to save this into permanent storage. So we're not going to need it just yet, but we will eventually. We're going to change this, of course, to be called something else. So we're going to call it add item page. And we're going to change the template URL here to add item. And we're going to pass in that nav params as well. And set that here. This dot nav params equals nav params. And I'm going to set up the title and description as well. I will just set those to be blank. And we can get rid of items because we won't need that in this view. And we'll remove that function as well. And instead we're going to replace it with the save item function. And we're going to say let new item. And let's another new thing to Angular 2. Basically, it just keeps the variables within a smaller scope rather than having variables leaking out into other functions and stuff. We're going to give that a title of whatever this dot title is and a description of whatever this dot description is. So as they modify those fields we created, that'll get updated here, and when they hit save item, it'll look to see whatever those values are and create a new item based on that. And now we're going to call this dot navparams dot get list page because we want to call a function on that list page, which will be save item, and we want to pass in new item, which is that item we just created there based on what the user inputted. And then we also want to pop that view so that we go back to our list page. So basically you push and you pop views. So we pushed on the add item page and then we pop it back off again to go back to where we were. I could also push more pages on here. I could push I don't know, an extra details page or something, and then I can provide even more information. Then I could pop that page, it would bring me back to the add item page. I pop it again, I'd go back to the list page. Okay, now that we've got our component created, let's actually import that into list.js. So we're not actually importing from the Ionic library anymore, we're importing our own component that we created. So I'll do it on a separate line, import add item page from, and we'll just supply the path to where that can be found, which is in the add item folder. So if I save that now, I should be able to hit the add item button. Yeah, there we go, now it's refreshed. If I hit add item, that will break. Okay, that's because I had a syntax error here. I've missed the closing bracket. So hopefully I can hit save and try again. There we go. So now that works. So we've got those two fields that we created before, and it's got those floating label things. As you click on them, there's this fancy little animation there. We can hit back to go back to the view we were on before. So that's all added automatically, just like in Ionic 1. And then we will be able to hit save eventually, but if I do that now, that's not going to work because we haven't hooked that up yet. So I can just say test, hit save, and nothing happens. So basically now what we need to do is add a function that will add that data to the list, and we're also going to make it save into permanent storage as well. But before we do that, let's make it so that we can click on these and see the details of the to-do item. So as you saw, we're also adding a description which you can't see here. Probably make more sense just to put it on this page, but for the sake of the tutorial, we'll do it on a separate one. So we're going to create another new component. This one's going to be the view item component. So I'll create that now and then come back. Okay, so I've created a new folder to hold the item detail component we're going to create now. I'm going to steal the template from this one again, just because I'm a bit of a slow typer and I'm sure you don't want to watch that. So with this one, we're going to use whatever the title of the item is as the title. We don't need any extra buttons here, so we'll get rid of that. And we're going to use the Ion card directive that was actually in there by default. And to use that, we will use Ion card content, and whatever we want to display in the card will go inside of here. And all we want to do is just show the description of the item. Okay, I'll save that, and now I need to create the item detail.js. And again, I'm going to just steal some code from here. Okay, for this one, we're not doing any pushing or popping, so we can get rid of the nav controller, but we do still need nav params because we're going to pass in the details of the item from the last page. And we're also going to get rid of add item page because we don't need that here. Change the template URL to be the item detail template. And of course, we'll change this to be item detail page. We'll change the nav controller with the nav params. Set that here as well. And get rid of the items again. And I can also get rid of this function because we don't need that. And then we'll set the title and the description to be the values that were passed in from the other page. So I'll set this to this.navparams.get item dot title, and this dot description equals this dot navparams, fix that, dot get item description. Okay, to walk you through what's actually going to happen here, so the whole process, so it starts off at the list page. We have the ng4 here creating an Ion item for every one of the items that are in our array here. And for each of those, if you click on them, it'll call this view item function, which will pass in that specific item that was clicked. That will come into here, and we can see we're setting title and description to whatever the title and the description of the item that is getting passed in is. And then that will allow us to render the title and the description here, because that will pull in these values, this.title, this.description. So the last thing we need to do is actually create this view item function. So we'll say view item, and then we want to push that item into our new page. So we'll call the item detail page, and then we'll pass in the item as item. And we also need to make sure we import that item detail component up here. So item detail page from the item detail folder. And as long as I haven't missed anything, that should all work now. So I should be able to click on one of these. No, error again. Okay, I found the problem. I forgot to capitalize that in there. Hopefully if we hit save now and try again, it should work. Okay, there we go. So now I can click on the item. It'll bring up the new page with the details in this little card here. Okay, so the only thing left to do now is to actually have our items be added to this list when we add an item, and then save that into permanent storage. So I'm going to create a data service now that will help handle all of that for us, and then we'll just be able to call a function called save item from our list that will handle storing that. Okay, so this one's going to look a little bit different to the rest of them. It's going to be, rather than a page, we've been defining all the others as at page. That's a decorator, which tells Ionic that we're building a page essentially. This one's going to be an injectable, which is basically a service we can use throughout our application. So for this one, we're going to import storage and SQL storage from the Ionic library. And so what this does basically is, if you've used something like local forage before, it's a similar concept. So just the plain local storage in the browser, which you can access just by storing strings on window.local storage. It's a great way to store small amounts of data, but the problem is that it's possible for it to get cleared at some point. So if you're storing important data for your application in local storage, obviously if it's randomly it can get wiped, it's not really a great solution. So things like local forage, I'll link to a post which explains all the different storage options in more detail, but essentially it helps you store it permanently. So in the case of SQL storage here, which is something that Ionic provides to us, that'll use the web SQL as a storage option if you're running through the browser. But if you install the SQLite native plugin, it'll actually use an SQLite database rather than storing data in the browser. So that's a much more permanent solution. Well, it is a permanent solution. It won't get, your data will never get wiped. And it also provides more powerful ways to query that as well, rather than just fetching and retrieving strings from local storage. The downside is, I think the only real difference I can see between Ionic's SQL storage and local forage is that with SQL storage you still have to store data as strings, as far as I can tell. But let's get into it. Hopefully it'll be made more clear as we actually code it. So we're importing the injectable from the Angular 2 library, and we'll add that decorator there, and we're creating a new class called data service. So we'll set up our constructor here. As you've probably seen, every class has a constructor, and we'll set storage to a new instance of storage, and we'll use SQL storage for that, and we'll come up with a name for our database. We'll call it To-Do app. You can call that whatever you want, really. We'll set the data initially to null, and then what we want to do is fetch any existing data that's in that database when we load the application. So we'll get To-Do app. Then once that's finished fetching that data, we'll pass through the to-dos to this function, and we'll just set the data to whatever came in. And as I said, you can only store strings, so whatever we store in the database is going to be in a JSON format. So we want to pass that so we get the actual array back rather than just a plain string. We're going to add a function called getData, and this will basically just have the role of returning the data from this service. So we're going to do, rather than actually returning just this.data, we're going to return this.storage.get to-do app. So this will return a promise rather than just fetching the data from here. Because if we just return the data, then that's not going to update throughout our application. So if I add something new, then that's not going to be reflected here. But by returning this promise, when we call get data, that's going to go fetch the latest data that's available in the database. And we also want a save function here. So we want to be able to pass in an item to this service, and we want it to handle updating our data in the database essentially. So we're going to add a check here to see if the data exists. If it doesn't, we're just going to set it to whatever the item is that was passed in, because there's only one of them. And we'll say let new data equal JSON.stringify item. So that'll create a JSON string of the item that we passed in. And then we want to set the storage of to the new data. If we already do have some data, we don't want to just override it, we want to add to it. So we'll do this .data.push item, that'll add that to the array, and then we'll let our new data equal JSON.stringify this .data. And then again, we'll set the storage to that. So in this case, we've got all the data that already existed added to it and then stored all that new data. Otherwise, we just overwrite what was there already. Okay, so now we're going to make some changes to our list.js to make use of that new data service we just created. So first, we're going to import the data service from data folder. And we're going to have to pass in the data service as well and set that here. Okay, so now we're going to get rid of this dummy data that we have, and we're just going to set that to be an empty array because the calls to load the data are going to be asynchronous, which means that our program is going to continue running until the data comes back at a later point in time. So we want to set that to be blank, so that if we're trying to do anything with this.items before the data is returned, it's not going to throw an error. And what we want to do when the app first loads is we want to call the data service. We'll call that getData function. And as I mentioned before, it returns a promise, not just the data directly. So we can create a function here to take in the to-dos that are returned. And when we do get them, we'll set this.items to JSON.pass to-dos. Or if nothing comes back, we'll set it to an empty array. I just noticed the screen on the right is blank here, which probably means there's an error somewhere, and there is. I forgot to mention that we need to import that data service as a provider in app.js. So we'll have to import that as well here from that data folder again, and we'll add it as a provider to make it available throughout the application. Okay, so hopefully if I save that, things should start looking normal again. Okay, so yeah, with applications working now, but obviously we've got no items because we haven't stored any in the database yet. So let's jump back into here and create a function called saveItem that will allow us to do that. So we're going to pass in an item, which will come from the add item page, and we're going to push that to our data, so to this.items. So basically that will make sure that as soon as we save an item, we'll immediately see it in the list here. But as well as doing that, we also want to send off that item to our data service to get saved. So that will go to here, and then it will run through all this and store it using SQL storage. Okay, so hopefully that should be done now. So let's give it a try and see if it works. So I'll click add item. We'll do test, hit save, and we have another error. I should have seen that. I used this items instead of item. And let's try that again. Hopefully no more errors. Add item, test, raw rather, test, save. Okay, and now you can see test was added there. Let's click it, and we have test there still. Let's try add another item to make sure it's working correctly. Hello, save. Okay, we have that there. We can look at that, and we can also look at that. Okay, so that all seems to be working. And one final test, if I refresh that, all the data should still be there. So yeah, it's not being lost on refresh, which means that our data service is successfully pulling that from the SQL storage, which since we're running through a browser is storing in WebSQL, but if it was on a device, then it'd pull it from the SQLite database. Okay, so that's the end of this tutorial. Obviously, there's a lot more we could do with this application. We could make it look a lot prettier. We could add the option to edit to-dos. We could add the option to delete to-dos, but it's probably a good place to leave it. We've covered off a few of the new Ionic 2 things, like how to switch between views, how to push data to views, how to save data, how to handle events and buttons and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully that's a pretty good starter application if you're new to Ionic 2. It's probably a nice little app to have a bit of a play around in. I probably will release another tutorial at some point, maybe where we'll extend this to do some more stuff. But yeah, I'll definitely be releasing plenty of Ionic 2 content in the future. So make sure you subscribe on YouTube, subscribe to my email list if you want. I'll provide all the links in the description. And yeah, have a good day.